Welcome to Gurteen College. It's fantastic to see so many people here today. Thank you for coming. I'm John Parry. I'm principal here at Gurteen, and I'm very proud that we are once again playing host to this important national event. Agriculture is a fantastic industry to work in. Farmers are passionate, innovative people. Irish family farms have a long, proven record to be resilient businesses. I know that every farmer attending the Energy and Farm Business Show today will rise to the challenges that our industry faces. The show aims to highlight current best practice across the key themes of energy, farm business, and sustainability. Agriculture is part of the solution to the global environmental issues we face. Today's show will highlight and share best practice, but we will also explore opportunities and the challenges that the future holds. I want to acknowledge with gratitude the support of our sponsors today. Without those sponsors, the event would not be possible. Thank you to the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Gas Networks Ireland, Tipperary County Council, Cultivate Credit Unions, Tipperary Local Enterprise Office, and the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. Your support is much appreciated. Our programme today includes some very high-profile contributors. Naming individuals when you're on a stage always risks missing someone or offending someone. But today, it's a risk I'm prepared to take. I believe any event would be proud to host an opening panel discussion that includes Minister for Environment, Climate Change and Communications, Eamon Ryan, TD. Marie Donnelly, Chair of the Climate Change Advisory Council. Tim Cullinan, President of IFA. Professor Frank O'Mara, Director of Teagasc. The panel will be moderated by Damien O'Reilly from RTE. On its own, this panel would be a mighty impressive guest list, but we add to those already named many industry experts, internationally renowned scientists, and successful business people. And we're still not done. At midday, Senator Picker Hackett, Minister of State for the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, will contribute to a panel discussion. And at 1600, at 4 o'clock this evening, our closing remarks are delivered by the Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Charlie McConalogue, TD. I'm sure you will agree that guest list is powerful. Today, you are taking part in an event which will write tomorrow's headlines. Events like this don't happen without a huge amount of work in the background. So I want to thank the organising committee publicly and wholeheartedly for their work. They include my colleagues from Teagasc, from the IFA, from here at Gurteen College, from the Tipperary Energy Agency, from Tipperary County Council, and from the Technological University of the Shannon, TUS. Thank you to everyone. There's a lot happening across the day. There are 4 separate pavilions, a large expo area, and a number of demonstrations. All of those things are happening concurrently. So my advice to you is to take a little bit of time and study the programme. Plan your day. Maps are prominently displayed across the site. They include QR codes for those of you that like to have the information at hand on your phone. If I point out 2 particular locations, toilet facilities located in all the static college buildings. So any of the permanent buildings on site have got toilet facilities and they're clearly signposted. Refreshments, all located in our sports hall, and you'd be very welcome to take part in that. I want to share a short story from my family, but I'm sure similar stories exist in many of your families as well. My grandparents were farmers on a small family farm in rural Cheshire. They farmed 32 acres. They grew a small area of corn. They kept dairy cows as the main enterprise. They had 2 horses. Lisa, apparently she was a work-shy shire horse. She used to turn her back when Grandad walked into the field. But once the collar was on Lisa, she was the sole source of energy on the farm. She provided all of the draft that farm required. There was a pony, and the pony's responsibility was to pull the cart that delivered the milk into the local town. Now, I can't promise that every detail of that story is correct. It's based on my mother's recollections. She's 89. Perhaps Stable-field, where those ponies were kept, was 2 acres and not 3 acres. And I know from time to time, Grandad borrowed a neighbour's tractor if there was heavy work to be done. The horses had a dedicated field, so in my mind, 10% of my grandparents' farm was dedicated to growing an energy crop. At least it's a crop that was used to provide energy. They grow hay and oats, and that hay and oats fed the horses, and those horses were our sole source of power. I'm not suggesting that life was easier or better. It certainly wasn't a golden age of agriculture. My grandparents lived a hard life. The point that I'm making is that in living memory, it was very common for farmers to be involved in renewable energy production. They didn't call it renewable energy production, but they were growing a crop to provide energy to feed the horses, and the horses were the sole source of energy. Lisa was the last shire horse on the farm. When she retired, she was replaced by a grey Fergie. As the world changes, perhaps it will again become more common for farmers to be involved in energy production. It was, just a lifetime ago, a common feature. As principal of Gurteen College, I'm often asked, what skills and knowledge will young people entering agriculture need to be successful? The record crop of students who start their course here in September are going to be key decision makers in the Irish farming sector in 2050. I don't know what the future holds, but my prediction is they will need to be flexible in their approach, willing to change and adapt to new market conditions and cope with a changing climate. Our collective role as the current industry leaders is to give those people the time, the space, and the opportunity to grow and to develop. We have some responsibility to point them in the right direction. Here at Gurteen, we've placed sustainability at the core of our new strategic plan. We're embracing the challenges that agriculture faces. We're very proud to be a Teagasc signpost farm. We try to demonstrate best practice to our students, but we know we're not perfect. We're progressively reseeding our farm with high clover swards. We're cutting our hedges less often. We're working closely with the National Parks and Wildlife Service and others to develop a management plan that will allow us to better look after the important areas of bog, and Marl Lake that we are custodians of at Loch na Hinch. I'm confident the future of Irish agriculture is strong. I'm confident that we will collectively have the skills, knowledge and ability to ensure our industry is a key part of the answer to the challenges the world currently faces. I'm confident today is going to be a good day and everyone will be a little wiser this evening. Thank you. Damien, it's now over to you.
Thank you. John, thank you very much for that. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see such a huge crowd here today, because usually when I'm heading to one of these conferences, you look out and if the weather is good, you'll say there's not going to be too many there because farmers will be busy. But I think, as John outlined there, we're at a very, very important stage in agriculture and climate in this country, and where both, I suppose, crisscross each other. And today, right across the campus and beginning in a couple of moments' time, we will have very important discussions about the challenges and opportunities which face the broad agricultural sector as we try to meet climate change targets. And I think, as John says, you see the first panel here and panels later today. It brings me back, and I don't mean to be glib about this, but for those of us old enough to remember, it almost brings me back to the peace process. You know, you're getting all of these different parties together around the same table to have this very important discussion about how everybody can work together to sustain agriculture, to sustain the environment, to sustain rural communities. And everybody in this room, and there's a lot of different stakeholders here along with farmers, have their own views and opinions about how we can best achieve that, and not least up on this stage too. So I'm going to invite, first of all, the Minister, Eamon Ryan, to have a short opening address, and that'll be followed then with a panel discussion. We'll be finishing at around 10:30 because there are a lot of other satellite panel discussions happening around the campus between now and, as John says, 5 o'clock this evening, which I hope you'll be able to try and get to as many of them as you can. So, Minister Ryan, I'll ask you maybe to come forward here, or if you prefer to stay there, I don't mind. Here. Yeah, if your mic is working, just for the opening address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damien, and thank you very much, everyone, for this opportunity to share a few thoughts on how we sustain 130,000 Irish family farms. That's something we're all absolutely agreed on, has to be centre stage in what comes next in Irish agricultural policy, environment policy, economic policy. We want an Ireland which has this characteristic of family farms right across the island who have a viable, thriving, successful business. It is a business in farming. It requires real skill. It requires real enterprise. And I just want to share a few thoughts as to how this might best be sustained, the way forward as I see it. Firstly, in any business, you know that you're more secure, it's more sustainable if there's a diversity of different incomes. If we tie ourselves into one market, or one supplier, or one customer, or one way, that's a higher risk. We're at the control then of that one supplier, that one customer, that one market. So diversity in income is something that will give our family farms strength. Secondly, I think we need to be aiming for, in our policy and our strategy, to get premium prices. We're not going to compete our family farm system with the big Texas or Chinese or Argentinian or other lots where you might have 15,000 cattle in a 3-hectare enclosure. That's not the market that we're competing with. Irish family farms come at a different size and a different scale. And I believe our strategy should be to aim for a premium price, to get a price for being sustainable environmentally as well as economically. Thirdly, that price is for the skills of the farmer. That price is actually for the knowledge of how you look after and manage and get the most from our land. It's a skilled profession. There's no one else has the knowledge of our land, our climate system, our waterways. So actually, and it's that skills, the likes of Gurteen College has been doing this for several generations now, which is going to be centre stage, and which what we have to pay for. We have to pay for a variety of different things, income stream coming from a variety of ways. First and foremost, of course, for good food. We live in a world which is so insecure. What's happening in our Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, this has been predicted. We know with a certainty that it's coming unless we change our ways. What Antonio Guterres said today, it will be a collective suicide pact, which would see Spain burn and deforest. And not just Spain, half the world, as he said today, is at risk. And the food that we currently import at large volume and large scale from the likes of Spain might not be as easily secure. So we need to produce good food, and we will be a major exporter of food because we have an island, a relatively small population, and an incredibly productive climate for growing food. If we're to get a premium, it has to be really high quality. It has to be good for animal welfare. It has to be really safe and also sustainable in how it leaves our soils and our land. So yes, food production at its core, but it's food production which plays to our strengths. The second variable we have to get right is climate. Is the storing of carbon in our soils and paying farmers for this. And it will be difficult. It will require real change. It's not easy because you're switching from for 60, 70 years saying the key thing now is to drain your land. There are certain parts we're going to have to be saying no, the real skill will be to re-wet land and store carbon in a scientific way which we get paid for. Still grazing it. Being really smart in terms of knowing the right time in which we get cattle and sheep back on the land. Because if we didn't graze it, you would just see alder and birch and holly and ash grow, and that would drain the carbon from the soil. So I'm absolutely convinced that our sheep farmers and our cattle farmers have a critical role in the climate fight, which they also want to be part of, and getting paid a premium for the produce that they create in that way and for the storage of the carbon. Thirdly, what we have to pay for and we have to restore is biodiversity. The world, and Ireland is not an exception to this, has lost half of all wildlife by invertebrate body mass weight in the last 40 years. Half of the natural world has been destroyed. Mainly in things we don't necessarily see. Insect life that you only really notice, where I as a child could drive home and the windscreen be covered in moths and insects, and today there's nothing. But that ecosystem, that system where nature gives us strength because it has this resilience which comes from diversity, we have to bring back and pay farmers to help do that. Fourthly, we have to improve our water quality and air quality. There are real constraints. We've gone from a country where we had 500 pristine river systems as recently as the late 80s to now where there's only 20. And we cannot have that. We cannot be trading on our green brand if our waters are polluted, are saturated, as the EPA says they are, by nitrogen and phosphates. And there are hotspots in the country where the likes of ammonia and air pollution, nitrogen, phosphate issues, we cannot ignore. We have to, if we're to get that premium for our food product, and also just for the very sake of being able to go down to a local river and go for a swim in it knowing that it's clean, that actually we look after our beautiful island and our beautiful country and world. Lastly, in terms of where we may get paid and where incomes and diversity of incomes can come, energy will be critical. And it won't be from that horse. It's more likely to come from a solar panel. It's more likely to come from anaerobic digestion. And really, biomass as well, but biomass fitting in within this natural system. Solar energy in particular is where we can make the biggest leap. We've already started. This government has changed the rules so you can now sell power back to the grid. We'll scale that up. It's made up to about 6 kilowatts for mainly households and so on. But we need to scale it up. Microgeneration scheme we just introduced so that the likes of this barn cover the roof. And particularly if you have a demand on the farm, be it for cooling or for animal husbandry, that you start using some of your own power rather than paying a fortune for electricity off the grid. That solar will go, we're starting towards even scaling that up then, up to 6 megawatts of power, which we will introduce in a scheme that doesn't have to go through the auction system that most other power supplies will do. And that will give a lot of farmers, working with communities or other developers, the opportunity to do solar in the field, still grazed, real return. Myself and Mary were talking earlier on about what we need to do on the climate side, and we're going to have to scale up solar way more than had been originally predicted. Wind as well. Wind has changed. The technology, if it had been here 10 years ago, we might have been thinking that small-scale wind farms would be the ones that would play the role. But unless you're in a very, very windy location, the truth is, in the last 10 years, the economics have changed so that large-scale wind is now where the real competitiveness kicks in. But that too, in community cooperation, I believe, could be a future income to Irish farming. Anaerobic digestion is one of the things myself and Charlie McConnell are talking about at the moment in terms of, can we turn to that? At a time when gas prices are almost 10 times their historic, 10 times more expensive than what we were used to over the last 20 years. It's beyond compare the challenge that represents. And there's been research being done in UCC for years and other locations which shows us the way we could convert some of the skills we have in grass production, we use for that as a feedstock into anaerobic digestion that gives a steady, predictable 15-year guaranteed income for a family farm. And the attractive thing about it is, I think all the measures we need to look for is still farming, not switching over completely. People are proud, rightly, and want a future that has been existed for generations for the family farm. These sort of technologies allow us to keep farming and have a diverse income from another area. Same with forestry, and same, go back to what I said earlier on about carbon farming. The European Commission this November will introduce a new regulation which comes in quickly, which pays people who store carbon, be that in forestry or in carbon farming or in carbon storage in other ways. If we I was down in Dingle last week, or a few weeks ago, and there's really interesting examples there where bottom up, farmers are starting to measure and monitor what's happening in their own farms. Simple devices, measure water quality, measure temperature, measure slurry, measure soil. That mechanism of measuring, when it's owned by the farmers, controlled by farmers, matched to a financing system where private capital wants to support and fund carbon storage, which they do at scale, governed by a European regulation which is coming, gives us the opportunity to do a form of forestry, Pippa can talk about it more later, which means we still keep farming, but we use tracts of the land. We get the right spot. Where's the best place on this farm to put in trees? Working around it, working with the farm in this, rather than just taking the whole farm and covering it in single monoculture plantation. That's a really attractive. It gives a fuel supply for the farm. It gives a steady income check to the farm, a different check to the food check, so that if one check is low, the other might cover the balance. This is all doable. This is at the centre of European policy and makes economic sense for our country, as well as reducing our emissions, helping us meet the targets we need to make. We will not see the Irish family farm survive unless we're willing to pay for it. And in government, we've given clear direction. That $1.5 billion we're taking from the carbon tax to provide for farmers, backing up the changes in the CAP, which are going to continue to go in this green direction. Whatever about the final details of this CAP, you can be absolutely certain the next one is going to go even further in this green direction, because Europe is burning. And Europe is at risk because it imports its energy, imports its food. It has to change. So this is the direction the world and our continent is going in. We have every advantage, we have every skill and ability to use that public money, cap money, private capital money, to make sure, more than anything else, in my mind, what's the biggest challenge, what's the most important thing, is that actually there's a generation of young farmers in their 20s today that say, I'm going to give it a go. Because I know I'm going to get an income which would allow me to raise a family on this family farm and actually continue the proud record we have. The current system does not deliver that. The current system for the vast majority of farmers does not pay farmers properly for the skills they have. The alternative can and will. And that's why I think we will make the change. Working environmentalists and farmers together, there's nothing to be gained for this being a divisive fight. You will never hear myself or Pip or anyone else doing this blame game, shame game. If only you do this game. What we want to do is make sure that there's the income for a new generation of farmers to continue the proud record we have in this country. Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much indeed for that. So, look, we have about 20 minutes or so just to tease out some of the issues there. And Tim Cullinan is president of the IFA. We have Mary Donnelly, who is chair of the Climate Change Advisory Council, and Professor Frank O'Mara, the director of Teagasc, just for those of you not too sure who we have up here on the stage. Tim, I might come to you first there. The Minister outlined the drastic measures which we all need to take in order to try and tackle climate change and meet our binding legal targets. Now, he also spoke about how farmers need to be compensated for playing their part in that. Why are we getting the impression that there's pushback from farmers when it comes to engaging in all of this?
I suppose, look, Damien, and I just want to refer to your comments at the start. You know, this is like the peace process, and look, we've always been engaging in this and have been, you know, for quite some time. And like, we understand, along with everybody else, you know, the challenges around climate change and what we have to do. You know, farmers have already done a lot. You know, any of the measures that was adopted by Frank and his team in Teagasc, farmers are working on those already. You know, with protected urea, the new ways of dealing with organic fertilizer, all of that is being done. But you know,
why won't you engage with the 30% target? What's so important that it has to be at 22?
Because if we look at the makeup of agriculture, and I mean, you know, if we look at the dairy sector here in Ireland, you know, farmers were dealing with a quota up to 2015. And if we look at the numbers we're dealing with at the moment, we're dealing with the number of animals that we had in the mid-90s. We have similar numbers here now. And you know, and I'm hearing this thing, and I was very concerned to hear the Minister the weekend again, moving back to talking about reducing animal numbers. We have been working and striving to work with reducing emissions. And this is about cooling down the atmosphere. I think it's very important that we keep our eye on the ball here and we work on reducing emissions. And you know, a lot of work has been done, a lot of work will be done. And look, if we're to go for 30% at the moment, it's going to devastate this sector. You know, the Minister, and we know the figures.
But why are we so hung up on numbers? I mean, animals now are more efficient than they were 20, 30 years ago. Farmers are getting more from the animals now thanks to improved breeding and feeding techniques and all of that. So, you know, you can still make the margins and you get the compensation. Why the hang up on the numbers?
Look, we haven't hang up on numbers. What we've hang up on is, you know, I mean, striving to achieve a 30% at the moment. It's clearly demonstrated that'll cost the sector $4 billion a year. And you know, if we look at, I think we need to look at the government's own act, and the act clearly says that there's 4 elements of that act that the government shall have regard for. And the first one is the social and economic impact of rural Ireland. And that's very, very important. We're here in the centre of Ireland here this morning, in Gurteen. I farm only 20 miles up the road myself. And that's very important, the social and economic aspect. And I'd like to ask the Minister, in that act as well, it clearly says the distinct characteristics of biogenic methane. What does that mean? In our view, you know, it's a different life, it's a different gas, it's less potent, less dangerous than gas from transport or whatever. And obviously the carbon leakage, Damien. I think this is very, very important for everybody. If we don't produce the food here in Ireland, well then it's going to be produced in a less efficient country.
Okay.
And I just want to comment as well on why we won't go to 30 straight away. We need time here. And I want to compliment Frank and his team on the excellent work they're doing. We're seeing now already the system we have here in Ireland where cows are out grazing grass and producing either dairy products or beef. It's been proven that those cows are producing up to 30% less methane. So I would like to ask the Minister, we need time around this, and those trials can be reviewed within the next 2 or 3 years. And we need to be very careful now that we don't make a decision that is going to cause serious disruption to our sector.
Okay, and I'll come back to the Minister in that in a moment. But Mary Donnelly, I suppose I'll introduce you almost as the kind of the peace broker. You're the Mo Molan then of the peace process here at the moment in this regard. You're trying to because you've engaged with all sides. You've heard all the arguments as chair of the Climate Change Advisory Committee. And there is this 22%, which farmers like Tim say, yeah, we can manage that. But then the Minister and others are saying, no, it's got to be 30% because everybody else will have to, I suppose, pick up the tab if we don't hit that. So you've listened to all sides. You've listened to the general public on this. What's your own assessment of what needs to be done and what can be done, taking into consideration Tim's concerns about the impact on the social and economic elements of sustainability?
So from the Council's perspective, I think I can make a few clear statements. Firstly, we are in a climate crisis. I don't have to elaborate that. We feel it, we see it around us. It's very real. We have set ourselves a really high ambition. It's the second highest ambition in the world, here in Ireland, and it's going to be a real challenge to achieve that. And I think we have to, stand back a little bit from the challenge that we're looking at. We have basically 3 gases that we're emitting: carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. Carbon dioxide, it's 67%. It's 2/3 of the gases that we emit. And we all do it. Farmers do it. Shopkeepers do it. School teachers do it. We all do it in the way we heat our homes, in the cars and the transport that we use. So we all have a challenge. That's a common challenge across all of our society. And it's not easy. It means we're going to have to change. We're going to have to transform how we use fossil fuels into the future in order to be able to do that. And that's a common challenge. Not just agriculture, it's agriculture and others as well. It's 2/3, it's the biggest part, and we have to move forward on it.
And that includes farm households as well, as Tim would point out.
Absolutely, it does. Then, of course, 1/3 of our emissions, and we are really a total outlier in that. There isn't anybody else in the European Union that has 1/3 of their emissions coming from agriculture.
But is that because it's our German car industry? If you know what I mean, this is the argument made. It looks very big. That's just because we have an awful lot of farms. It's because of where we're plonked on the planet, and it's a legacy of a country that has agriculture as its main industry in the way that other industries in other countries are their main industry.
Absolutely, and we're very fortunate. I think we're very fortunate. We're, as they say, from a climate perspective, we're in a temperate sweet spot. And that's why we have the capacity on this green island to produce agriculture. And as the Minister says, our target is to continue to produce food, both for people here in Ireland and in Europe and across the world. But the key issue, just as for the carbon dioxide, we need to change, equally in agriculture, how we achieve that level of production has to change. And the fortunate thing is, I don't want to get hung up in numbers, because really the message today is we need to start now. We can't wait for a number 22, 30. I won't say it's irrelevant, of course it's very important.
But it seems to be a sticking
action.
point. It doesn't seem like a big gap, in any language, 22 or 30% of anything, not a lot in it really. But it seems in this instance, there's 4 billion euros in it, according to the IFA.
It's a manageable gap. It's a manageable gap because we know there are steps we can take today. And Frank will come in on this. Take some of the fertiliser costs that farmers are paying today at an exorbitant increase in price. Can we manage that more efficiently, which actually is economically sensible to do? It's also good for the climate. Can we actually spread that much wider? 5% of fertilisers were protected urea so far in the latest statistics. Why is it only 5% when we know it's a better product and it's cost effective to do it? So, what we need to do is to get the good messages of what we can do out there and get enough people to start using those now, right? Because then we get the benefit.
Well, just on that, Frank, you're involved at the coalface in looking for new technology and methods to help farmers meet targets, reduce emissions, and we can list them here: low emission slurry spreading, multi-species swards. These are all the buzzwords we're hearing more and more about now on farms, and the ASIP and project is working away as well. But at the same time, then the EPA comes out with a report each year, and we're seeing all of a shift in the right direction. When are we going to actually see results which show that these technologies, which are being implemented on farms and methods of farming, that they're actually going to have a positive, demonstrable impact that Eamon Ryan can look at and say, oh, well, maybe we don't have to reduce the numbers if we can reduce emissions on the same numbers? Are we going to see those figures soon?
Yeah, look, I'll come to that in a second, Damien, but I think it is important to set a couple of context points here from my point of view. Like, we do have a low emissions production system as it stands. Now, people might say, look, you would say that, wouldn't you? But if we had a fairly intensive dairy and beef production system, as the Minister outlined, where we've, animals, very, very large numbers confined, our dairy cows were on very high input systems, the route we would be taking now to try to reduce our emissions and improve our sustainability, we'd be saying, God, we've got to move to a grass-based system, because it is a much better starting point to be on. And I suppose that's important for us to recognise that and I guess to be proud of that. What it does mean, though, is we have some of the low-hanging fruit gone already, in that, we have a pretty low carbon footprint for our milk and our beef, so it does get harder and harder to reduce it the lower you are. But that's not an excuse to say we need to do nothing, or the agriculture sector needs to do nothing. Of course it does. It is a big sector of Irish emissions, and we do need to reduce it. And I think, the positive.
But when are we going to see the results actually in EPA reports that things are turning in the right direction?
So look, we can see some of the green shoots of growth, because when we do look at some of the indicators like protected urea, it is still at a very low level, but it is growing. This year there's probably supply chain issues with getting fertiliser, including protected urea, but I'll come back to that in a second. We are seeing a pretty significant growth in the amount of slurry spread by low emission slurry spreading techniques. We're seeing huge interest in clover on farms, and so I think this year, sometimes you never waste a good crisis is one motto. This year we've had huge increase in input prices, particularly fertiliser, and it has forced farmers to think about, well, how can I, instead of paying a huge price of that fertiliser, can I take it out of the air? Can I get the clover in my swards to actually do the job of making fertiliser for me? So we are seeing this year a pretty significant reduction in the amount of fertiliser being used, and as much as possible farmers using protected urea. So I think when the figures for 2022 are tallied up, we will see that reduction starting to trend.
Right, but one final question before I go back to the Minister, because I'm sure he'd be interested to hear what you have to say as well. What advice are you giving young dairy farmers now, new entrants into dairy, who go to Teagasc obviously for advice? It's what it's part of your remit, and they're saying, where are we going to be? I'm 25, I'm taking over the family farm, I can get a bank loan, I want to know where I should be going. It is a predominantly dairy farm. What advice are you actually giving those young farmers now?
So look, if somebody today is looking to get into dairying, there's no barriers to getting in. It's a very attractive proposition from an income. It's the one sector of farming that does give consistent income, and it is all about, in the end of the day, farmers being able to make.
But are you erring on the side of caution, or are you saying drive on?
We're telling them that if you're getting in, make sure you have your production system as sustainable as you can from both an economic, a social, but in particular an environmental point of view. So you've got to have that system set up that it has all the right technologies, from both a water quality, an air quality, that you're looking after biodiversity on the farm, and obviously that you're going to have a low greenhouse gas system. And in the end of the day, it's the systems that are able to produce food with as low an emissions profile or the best emissions profile, are the ones that will prosper.
Okay, Minister, coming back to you on this issue with regards to carbon leakage. In other words, we're very efficient when it comes to producing dairy in this country, small herds, so on and so forth. And we export right across the globe. There are many brands that are well-known household names that are to be found all over the world, milked from cows in this country. And the industry would say they're very proud of that. But if we cut back on that production, in other words, the 8 billion litres, if we go back to 6 billion or whatever like that, those 2 billion litres, and I'm just pulling those figures out in this context, it'll be just or usurped elsewhere in less sustainable countries. So the carbon leakage question, what's your answer to that?
I'm trying to put myself in the mind that 25-year-old is wondering where you take out a loan. And the answer to that is yes, because Kerrygold sells for twice the price as American butter in the shelves in New York and Chicago and Philadelphia. Twice the price.
Premium product, is that why?
Tastes better. American butter tastes like maize. But also, it's connected to their vision and image of what this island is like and why we're, in this global context, buying from an island, a beautiful green place. That's part of the premium. Now, Kerry Group are committing to a 30% emissions reduction by 2030 in their Scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions, when you're counting for climate, is what do your suppliers provide? And Irish dairy farmers would be typically about 85% of those Scope 3 emissions for Kerry Group. So it's critical. So by Kerry Group committing to that, I'm absolutely certain that Kerry Group are going to have to pay for those water quality, all those measures you mentioned. Part of the income stream, part of the problem with farming is the farmers don't get enough of the final price. But the likes of Kerry Group committing to these climate targets, and the reason they do, well, various reasons.
And I know you're not mixing Kerrygold and the Kerry Group up.
I know I'm not, sorry, but just,
but
I talk about the other. But the reason they do is because they know they will not be able to get financing if they're not climate compliant.
But just come back to the carbon leakage question. The demand for dairy and beef is growing. The world population is expanding, and in less wealthy countries, particularly in Asia, that is where the demand for animal protein is growing. So are you saying to Irish farmers, you cut back? What do we say then to the concerns that will just be taken up in a less sustainable country?
Those countries are also going to have to meet their climate targets, and they're also going to have to be part of the solution. No country gets an out. But I keep going back to, how do we make sure that farming is viable here for family farms? It's not just Kerry Group. Can I give another example, just to prove the point? Guinness have just opened a new factory down in, announced last week. 100% zero carbon. Everything they're doing, and they're a major consumer of Irish agriculture, particularly tillage and other crops. What they're saying, because their customers are going to demand it, is that our farmers have to be into regenerative farming.
Yeah,
I'll give a third example, because no, it's important.
No, but all these agricultural conferences we go to, we are hearing that from these organisations. They are saying that the customer is demanding, be it Danone, be it any food producer in this country, they're saying we have to deliver because that's what our customers want. That's a given.
But
and that includes the farmer on the ground. Yeah.
That's the most important reality.
Yeah.
That the Glambias, the Kerry Groups, all the Arbonne, all the co-ops are going to have to go in this green direction because they won't be able to get finance and don't be able to sell to their customers.
Well,
that means this is the way to go for Irish farmers.
Okay, so one other question to you, and we read recent figures. Dairy farmers are making a load of money for the first time in a long time. Their input costs are very high as well. But those young farmers that are looking at an income of upwards on €100,000 from a relatively small family grass-fed farm of 80 to 100 to 120 cows or thereabouts, what are you saying to them now about how they should farm in the future? You're saying cut back by 20 cows or...
Same what Frank is saying.
Yeah.
They can't farm if we're polluting the local river. Like, we have to stop polluting the waters.
And does that
sure
mean
that
cutting back cattle numbers or introducing technologies?
I think it's a mixture of different methods, and it'll be up to each farm. Listen, it's the farmer has to decide what's best for their farm and what works in their farm. But some of the measures that I see coming, which will give income diversity, may mean it's less intense. Maybe, like, you can't have an intense farm if it's not within the environmental limits that Frank rightly says every farmer is going to have to live within. So but that's up to the farmer then to what's the best mix and how can I get income streams that give me that. They won't, the key point I mentioned, Kerrygold and Glanbia, is they will not get the income if they're not part of the environmental solution.
Okay. Who wants to come back in there?
Yeah, I want to come back to a few points there. And first of all, the Minister spoke a lot about diversification and other markets and premium and all the rest of it. Case in point, in the current CAP, we're putting 250 million into an organic scheme. 250 million. And we're seeing at the moment, farmers are coming to me. I had a number of farmers that want to establish into dairying organically, and what they're finding, Minister, is they're achieving a lower price for organic milk than they are for conventional milk, and massive costs to achieve the organic status. Similar with beef, that's what's happening there as well. But
I'm sure there are organic dairy and beef farmers who'll disagree and say that they're getting on perfectly.
Well, Damien, I can only deal with the farmers that are coming to me. But also...
the conventional farmers not making money as well.
Damien, before you go back to the
well,
Minister, my question as well is, we're talking about carbon leakage, we're talking about all of those measures, a substantial cost that we've said to farmers. I want to know, what has the government done? Consistently, we've been asking for the government to come forward with an impact assessment, a cost analysis of what all of this is going to cost our sector. And before we move forward, I want to see that from the government. I've been asking for that. Our association has been asking for that now for 2 years. And this is massive now. We need to be very careful here of what we're trying to do. If we're going to drive on...
But maybe just while we're getting that sort of... do you want to come back in on...
Yeah, I want to come in because, I think a couple of principles we have to maintain here. Firstly, we're in a crisis, we need to take action. It's going to be painful for everybody in all of our society. But what we need to do in the agricultural sector is to ensure that the transformation, the transition that we're going to go through ensures income to farmers, that the family farm is survivable and can earn a living and can survive into the future.
Tim says there's been no independent economic assessment impact of...
There's a lot.
Okay.
Look, one of the things that I point to, and Frank will comment on this better than I mean, we now have what is 100 signpost farms who are basically doing, let's call it, the right things, all the good things that we want to do. It's a new scheme, it's only about a year, but I'd ask Frank, are these people losing money on the basis of that?
No.
So they're still making the same income, doing it right. So the message here is that, yes, it's a change, but the change doesn't necessarily mean it's going to cost your bottom line.
Okay.
Yes, it's a different way of doing things, but it can be done in a profitable way.
All right, well, I'm interested, you're right there on the signpost farms, and these are kind of model farms which you're working with around the country to try and obviously, are you trying to aim for carbon zero situations on those farms? Explain how they're working and what results we're getting so far.
Okay, so signpost farms are normal farms, they're farmers' farms. They've allowed us to work with them over the course of the next number of years, probably a good few years. It's in collaboration with all the co-ops, the meat companies and many others. And basically, we are giving those farmers the best advice on how to improve their income and reduce their emissions and other environmental impacts as well. And look, by and large, it's the type of things that have been mentioned here, reduce your fertiliser, put in clover, use protected urea, use low emission slurry spreading, plant hedges, and so on. And the idea is that those farms will, they're like the farms of the future. We'll eventually have to be bringing those farms to climate neutrality. So we're measuring what's happening in the carbon sequestration in their fields as well, because that, in the end of the day, will have to offset the residual emissions from the farm that we can't obliterate or mitigate. But I just wanted to come back to the premium price issue. And Ireland is able to command a premium price for lots of our products on the world market. Not enough, farmers would say, and so on. But to keep ourselves ahead and to make sure that our Kerrygold continues to command a premium price, that's why we need to keep ahead of this emissions game. It is one of the reasons why as a sector, an agricultural sector, we do need to continue to make progress. And I believe we can make a lot of progress in reducing our emissions further. There's obviously a regulatory need to reduce our emissions as well, to comply with the legislation, and it's the right thing to do. So, there's all those reasons, and I think, the Minister talked about various diversification options, and you asked me a question about farmers getting into dairying and so on. And look, it would not be feasible or the right thing to do to have every farm in the country a dairy farm. I'm a great believer in a diversity of agricultural systems, and I think the important thing, though, is to make those other systems attractive. If one system is continually paying a lot more profit per hectare, well, obviously there's going to be a draw into that. So I think we need to look at our tillage sector. We've lost a lot of tillage ground. How can we make that sector more attractive to maybe reverse some of that decline in the acreage of tillage? Tim has mentioned organics. Organics now is an attractive option for farmers, albeit with the price issue at the moment, anaerobic digestion. If we can make those options attractive for farmers, they will be interested in them. And I think that's the key to having a diversification of systems in our agriculture.
All right, and Tim, you just wanted to come back there before your mic went to finish a point, then I'll go back to the Minister.
I want to make a point on the carbon, and the Minister has said as well on the carbon storage, the farmer will be paid. like, we need to remember where we are, Minister. There was a decision taken that the LULUCF, the land use, was separated out from dealing with emissions until 2030. So is the Minister saying this morning that if I can prove that I'm sequestering carbon into my farm, or any farmer here, that they're going to get paid for that straight away? I want to know that from
Carbon trading?
Yeah. No, well, carbon, yeah, who's going to pay, and will it be the farmer will get the benefit of this?
Mitigation.
We need to be very careful here, Damien, that if farmers are sequestering carbon and they're doing a public good by taking carbon out of the atmosphere, that payment goes back directly to the farmer.
Okay, so has it been ring-fenced? Minister, on that, on sequestration, this is an issue a lot of farmers raise as well, that they're not getting the credit for that.
I agree with Tim. I think it has to go to the farmer. And go back to what I was saying earlier on, it's the farmers going to be doing the monitoring and measuring, and they own the data, and they should own the credit. So yes. Now, it'll take a year. Commission say they're going to bring it out in November. Regulation, Mary, will take about a year typically to produce. It'll take, like, this won't be easy, but it's absolutely doable. And yes, I think it should belong to the farmer.
Okay. It will require, though,
Yes,
if I may, and I think this is a kind of a plea, really. We need to know our science here better. You talk about hedgerows and whatever. We really don't know what it means. You know, we think it means this, or we think the land is absorbing this, or whatever. So we do need to increase our investment in our research and knowledge in order that we have a very solid basis, and we can say, yes, this is the baseline, and this is what we're storing, and put your euros behind that because it's worth money.
Just to come back on that, Mary, that's all fine, and you're right, we're not sure, but one thing we do know, you drive up and down this country, drive 5 miles out the road here, we have more hedgerows per hectare than any other country, I'd say, in Europe and a lot of countries in the world, bar where we're going to move production, where they have to saw down trees to increase production, to compensate if we have to reduce the
hedgerow, are they obliged to grow another one? If a farmer removes a hedgerow, are they legally obliged to plant another one?
Plant another one now.
That's been happening?
That's happening, yes, yeah. But there was another point that the Minister mentioned earlier on about rewetting of lands, and said we can continue to use them for productive land as well. Well, I don't know. I've been farming for a long time, Damien. If you re-wet land, I don't know how you're going to put cattle or sheep on that land as well. I don't think the two of them sit very well together, Minister.
Minister?
20% of our lands are peaty soils. They're the ones we have to target. A lot of this is going to come out I couldn't agree more with Mary. This needs good science and understanding of the land. And we're doing a land use review at the moment. We're halfway through it. Teagasc working with the EPA. And that is the most important project, I think, to get this right. It has to optimise for 5 things. It has to optimise for rural development, community, family farms, young people particularly. It has to optimise for carbon biodiversity, for water and ammonia pollution. Now that's tricky because you're optimising for 5 things, but that's what we need to do. And that does need knowledge of soils, and this is the skill in farming. Good farming people know this. Those farms, those signpost farms, look, it's really knowledge about the soil and about water and about what's happening locally. Overall land use review will tell us where we give supports, but it'll be the farmer at the local level to know what's the best thing to do in this field or that field, and that skill is what we need to pay for.
Okay, you want to come back in there briefly on that, Frank?
Just briefly on the re-wetting and so on, and I see my colleague Gary Lanigan down there, who's leading the biggest project on monitoring carbon in agricultural soils, I would think, anywhere in the world, given our size. You'll see one of them out there. There's one of these, what we call flux towers, measuring the absorption or emissions of carbon from the soil. We've over 30 of those around the country. But I suppose, you know, one of the things we're looking at is, can we get this kind of partial re-wetting so that you can still farm, like you don't need to bring the water table maybe up to the surface, maybe 20 or 30 centimetres below the surface. We don't know whether it'll work, how much farming you will be able to continue on that. And I guess that's where the idea of, if farmers have to do that, or if we want them to do that, you know, that's where there has to be the appropriate payment. That's this either a just transition or an incentive, because there could be a very, very significant benefit in terms of reducing CO2 emissions from doing that. So if someone does it, they should get well paid for it. But I suppose, look, there's probably a bit less than 20% of our soils in that category, Minister, maybe somewhere around 10 or whatever. But anyway, And I suppose, look, that's an area of intense research.
All right, Mary, can I just ask you about policy? Farmers will always say, we're not breaking any laws, we're following policy, we're following the money, we're inspected within an inch of our life by various different agencies who come on the farm unannounced and so on and so forth, and that they're being scapegoated here in all of this. They are being branded as, polluters of the environment and the atmosphere. Do you think that, that there is a narrative out there which is a little bit unfair, considering, as I said, that farmers are literally following policy which has been agreed at government level over decades and at Brussels level?
Well, I mean, we're in a space now where it's not just the literal letter of the law. Of course, no farmer, I believe, is breaking the law per se. But that's not how you farm. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, this is the legislation, this is what I have to follow. We're looking at practices and operation of farms. And it is true to say that policy is a fundamental issue. Firstly, policy has to give a clear direction. And, I think we have to stand up and be counted that our policy direction today is different to what our policy direction was in 2015. Let's face it, the message is different. The policy, as a consequence, has to be different.
We had a government then, remember, as well, who were saying we are going to be the fastest growing dairy producer in Europe, and heralded it as a great thing, and probably shamed a lot of farmers into increasing numbers.
But this is why I say policy has to be very clear. Our direction of travel must be very clear, and that's where, the government has a really strong leadership role, as indeed has the IFA, a really clear vision of what it is we want to achieve. And then we need to support that. We need to support that with incentives, we need to support it with advice, and sometimes, yes, we do need to support it with regulation.
And Tim, is it a case that there may be a situation where the tail is wagging the dog here, and that there are big operators, big industrial sized, or the industry in general, along with, I suppose, bigger farmers, more intensive farmers, that are holding everybody else back, holding back the smaller, medium-sized farmer that obviously wants to do better by the environment?
Look, Damien, here in Ireland, we have the family farm unit. That's what we still have, and I think that's very, very important. And it's not big against the small. It's about our job is working with all farmers to try and bring all farmers along. But you made the point yourself. Farmers were encouraged to expand from 2015 onwards. Farmers have done that. They've invested in excess of 2.2 billion themselves, along with what the industry...
Is that the crux?
No, it's not the crux. But what I didn't get an answer from the Minister here this morning. What I want to know, Minister, is, before we move forward, I'm not clear on the whole carbon sequestration. You're saying we're going to get money for this. We're talking about a massive shift here. I didn't hear from you this morning. Has the government, or is the government, willing to do an assessment around this, a financial assessment, what this is going to cost? KPMG are clearly saying, if we move with what you said on the radio last Sunday, it's going to cost this sector 4 billion. 4 billion. This is massive. This is a wipeout. I want to know from the Minister here this morning a clear statement before we move forward, and we will work and engage with Mary, with Frank, with you, Minister. But before you move forward, I want to see it in writing that the government can demonstrate what this is going to cost our sector.
Yeah, of course we'll have to provide that. But the biggest, if I can, of course everything, the most detailed analysis done. But the figure that really jumped out to me in recent years looking at this, the average beef farmer owns 13,000 euros a year. 13,000 euros is the income on a beef standard, about 80,000 of the family farms. Now, if our key metric is getting young people into farming, hands up would go into a career for 13,000 a year.
Well, three quarters of them have other off-farming.
They may well do.
Yeah.
But we should be paying people properly, particularly in those smaller, more marginal farms, because they actually have a critical role. That's the economics that I think needs to change. The current system doesn't work for the vast majority of Irish farmers.
But have you done an independent economic assessment?
Damien, and in the current cap, that's what has happened. You've left the vulnerable sector behind, because we still need the suckler the sheep and the tillage farmer. As Frank is saying, we're trying to grow the tillage sector. And what has happened here, in the new CAP reform, you have excluded a proper payment for the suckler and the sheep farmer. And if we take those out of the vulnerable areas, and remember in the 3 pillars of sustainability, social is very important here, Minister.
Okay.
And if we don't look after those sectors, they will
we're going down a slightly different route here. What we need to talk about, obviously, is how agriculture can play its fair role in helping us meet these binding targets into the future. That's what we're actually talking about here. So, Minister, can you give us an update? You're meeting Charlie McConnell tomorrow, is that my understanding? And when are we going to actually have a final figure as to what farmers need to actually do?
In my mind, we should get this done before the end of July because we've last cabinet meeting. But it is part of an ongoing process. This will continue to evolve as we learn more about the economics, about what's happening in our land, and also each year, because it is challenging, and making the change is going to be huge. We will learn by doing. So, and particularly that land use review, and particularly the issue around it's not just about farming, it's about our emissions from land use, from peatlands and from forestry is probably our biggest challenge, because we found there that rather than being a sink of emissions, it's a source. So yes, we will get, I believe, agreement. Minister McConnell and myself have a very similar understanding and vision that it's the family farm we want to make sure protects and provides, and I believe we can do that in a way that actually meets our emissions target.
But that's why Irish farmers say we're the best country in the world to grow grass. We had the hottest day yesterday, now it's raining today. It's a great growing weather in that regard. I'll just leave you all, I suppose, with a final thought for our audience here, because as I said, we need to move on to once the rain stops, to the other pavilions where there are a number of sessions beginning, and I'll mention those to you in a couple of moments' time. But just Tim, again, we're here. It's agriculture at a crossroads. Now, are you going to take the road to helping meet climate target challenges, or are you going to still stand there and wait until you're dragged along?
No, and Damien, I have to say here that we are working on this. So we are working on achieving reducing emissions from farming. But this conference today as well is around renewable energy. And I just want to make the point here as well. So we have both ministers coming forward, our own Minister for Agriculture, talking about financing or subsidising particular solar panels from the TAM scheme, increasing it up to 60%, that's fine. But what we need here is we need new funding around this. If we're going to have a proper solar grant-aided system, that we want to encourage farmers to get into renewable energy, they have to be able to have a proper system of feeding this back out into the network as well. We need to look at all of that, but we need the proper funding. Minister, you're mentioning about anaerobic digestion. I put these proposals to you back at the time when we sat down with you, when you were coming forward with a programme for government. At the time, you said to me it wasn't viable. How has it become viable in the last 2 weeks? I'd like to know that. And the only way it will become viable, Damien, is that the proper tariff for farmers and grant aid to get into those systems. And we want to work. We want to embrace renewable energy as farmers. But successive governments has left us behind in that role. And I think there's a huge opportunity now if this minister wants to step forward and have the proper funding and the wherewithal of doing all of this.
And actually, energy is in Pavilion 1. There's a number of discussions. We'll be having one on the energy policy, the path to 2030, and that's happening at 10:40 in Pavilion 1. For those that are interested, you might come along to that one, Tim. But just on I suppose we finish on that issue then. Tim is right about energy and very much part of this. Parry, we seem to be very, very slow in this country when it comes to encouraging renewable energy production, particularly and giving farmers an alternative there. There's any amount of stories, horror stories come back over the years, of where there's been no joined up thinking when it comes to renewables and biomass. Is that something that crossed your area?
Yes, I mean, at the moment we're in a situation where we're behind the curve. We've started our 5-year budget. We're a year and a half into our 5-year carbon budget. We said we wanted a reduction of 4.8% a year. The numbers for 2021 are going to come out later this week. And at best we're about 2%. So, you know, we've already slipped in year 1. We need to take action. We need to take it very, very fast. So that's absolutely clear from the climate message. The other reality is security of energy supply. We have the opportunity to use our own resources, wind and solar, to be more secure in our energy supply, to go for solar panels on the roofs of barns, to be able to use that energy ourselves, to use some of it, for example, in the second car that many farms have. Let it be an electric car and charge it with your own power.
Yeah.
So the opportunity really does exist, on the one hand, to implement for the measures on climate which are economically proven already, and secondly, let's make ourselves more secure from an electricity point, using our own opportunities, particularly on the farm.
And Frank, just we've this year been reminded of our dependence on fossil fuels and how we have to move very fast away from that towards renewables. There are targets there. Again, what are farmers saying to you? The food versus fuel discussion, does it happen now? And are we doing enough at governmental level to encourage and entice farmers to go down the renewables route, be it with solar, be it with biomass, be it with wind farm?
Look, I think we're probably at the point of where those schemes or those options are going to become more viable for farmers, like the anaerobic digestion, producing biomethane. I think, you know, there are plans to bring out a pilot program around that, and I think farmers would welcome that. We see, can we set up this industry and create it as an option for farmers? I think solar, particularly on rooftops, in particular on dairy farmers, where there is our intensive livestock, where there is a lot of consumption of electricity, I think that is a viable option once a few issues around planning regulations and so on. So I think farmers will respond to those. But look, I think by and large, you know, farmers listening to this here this morning, you know, they're probably bamboozled with figures over the last while, and we must do this, we must do that. Like, definitely, I suppose I would say to farmers, look, we are going to have to change the way we farm. But we've been changing the way we farm as long as I've been around. So it's only a process of continued evolution.
Right.
We are now evolving to a lower emissions type of farming. I think from our point of view in Teagasc, we're the Agriculture and Food Development Authority, we're still very, very committed to food production. That is what we want to do. We don't want to see food production cut. If every country took the option of let's cut our food production to solve our agricultural emissions, well, you know, that wouldn't be an option. So we're very committed to continuing a strong food production industry here in Ireland, and we're here to help farmers through that journey.
All right, and Minister, just very briefly, because we are over time, just on that, I mean, is the government, is your department or other departments doing enough to try and encourage a really profitable and meaningful renewables programme for farmers and landowners in this country?
Yes, and we're about to do a hell of a lot more. Just to answer Tim's question, what's changed in the last 2 years? The war in Ukraine has changed everything. The price of gas is a multiple of what it was. Energy and food being used as a weapon of war is going to accelerate all these changes. We are introducing a whole range of measures to make solar power a real reality. The biggest constraint is going to be grid. I see Mark Foley from EirGrid is here. The biggest challenge, the most frustrating thing is if you don't have the grid connection, it's hard to tap into it. How we work with the ESB and EirGrid to make these grid connections is the most important critical obstacle. But yes, in solar, in anaerobic digestion particularly, those two areas are going to be a major part of the climate solution and a major income support and cost reduction for Irish farmers.
All right, okay. We're going to leave it there. We could, I suppose, stay for another hour discussing and teasing out other issues, but let's hope, I suppose, that there is some sort of meeting of minds on this issue, because it is important for farmers and for households and for all of us, that there is sustainability when it comes to the environment, the economy and rural communities. There are three key pillars there that we must be mindful of, that what we continuously hear about. But we wish you all the very best. Thank you all for joining us, to Tim, to Mary, to Frank and to Minister Ryan. Thank you all very much. And